A 4-patch block has 2 rows with 2 equal-sized squares in each row for a total of 4 patches. To make this block, you could use a template like this, trace around it on the fabric, or you could use your rotary cutter to cut out these individual squares here. But both of these methods take a long time if you're going to make a number of 4-patch blocks. In this video, I'll go over a quick way to make 4-patch blocks with fabric strips. I'll be using a 2.5-inch wide strip, but any size will work. I'll show you how to cut, sew, and then recut to make these 4-patch blocks. Before you start any quilting project, make sure your fabric is pressed. I've folded this fabric from selvage to selvage. Try to get it nice and straight, and then I'm going to fold the fabric again. This time I'll take the fold and I'll fold it from fold to the selvage. I want to make sure that this is nice and flat up on the top. I like to line this selvage up with one of the lines on my mat to make sure that I'm cutting against the cross grain here. First, I want to trim this edge off so I get a nice clean edge. So I'm going to come over and let's see, if I use this line, I want to, let's see, how, oh, do you see how it goes far in here? So let me move this over just a little bit. Let's see, if I use this line right here, then I'm going to be able to trim that off. And I like to use my mat line, so I've got things line up on this line, and then I'm using this line right here on the mat, and then I like to use my ruler lines. So I'm checking this line down here to make sure it's lined up, this line up here. I'm also checking these vertical lines to make sure everything's lined up, because when you're cutting you want to kind of double check yourself before you cut. I have a nice clean edge right here. I could move this over 1, 2.5 inches, and I would end up right here and cut this off. I like to have my ruler over the top of the piece I'm going to cut, so I kind of protect it. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to flip this piece over, and I want to line it up with the edge here. I want to line the bottom up. I'm going to take my ruler and line up 1, 2.5 inches. And as I said earlier, I also like to line these lines on my ruler with the lines on my mat. Okay, so I'm ready to cut. I open up my rotary cutter, cut away, and there I have my 2.5-inch strip. I've cut this 2.5 strip from another fabric, and I'm ready to put right sides together. I'm not worried about this selvage edge because later on I'll cut that off. I don't like to use pins when I put the right sides together because I think they kind of distort the fabric and they tend to get in the way. But if you feel more comfortable with pins, it's okay. I'm going to sew a 1/4-inch seam when I sew these 2 strips together. I have what's called a 1/4-inch foot here. It's exactly 1/4 inch from where the needle goes down to the edge, so that makes it easy to sew. If you don't have a 1/4-inch foot like this, then you'll want to find out where the 1/4-inch mark is on your sewing machine. I'm also using a regular stitch length to sew that seam. Normally I would use a neutral color of thread. For this demo I'm using red so you can see better. I like to start with a scrap piece of fabric, which I call a feeder or a leader. Fold it in half, and I just sew on that to get started. I think it helps me keep my seam a little bit straighter if I start on that. I don't do any reverse to lock my stitches. I'm just going to sew, oops, and continue right on to this piece. I'm checking to make sure that everything lines up. Let me get this fabric. And I just sew like that all the way to the end. So I'm approaching the end of the fabric. Notice these two strips don't line up, and that's okay. You don't have to worry about that. When I come off of my sewing, I like to have another one of these scraps of fabric ready. I fold it in half, clip those seams. Now I'm ready to take this over to the ironing board. I'll press the seams to one side. You've probably heard the saying, press to the dark. So here's the dark side. If I lay this on my ironing board like this and fold back the dark, it'll automatically press towards the dark. So you can see here I've pressed my fabric towards the dark, and now I'm ready to cut my little sections. I want to line this up on, just like I did before. I like to use my mat. I'll line this up along one of these horizontal lines, and I'll be cutting this edge here to get rid of that selvage and to get a nice clean edge. Instead of starting on the other side and flipping it, this isn't too much to handle, so I'll just start on this edge. So I line up my ruler, cut away that selvage, and now I'll be cutting sections that are the same size or width as my original strip. My original strip was 2.5 inches. So I'll need to cut these sections 2.5 inches. I'll use my ruler to go over the top. Here's 1, 2.5. I actually like to put this ruler on this line right here in the center. Sometimes that helps me when I have to cut these sections off. So after I've checked, I have a section that looks like this. Continue on cutting these 2.5 inch sections off these two strips till I get to the end. Now I'm ready to sew my 4 patch. I will take and flip one of these sections upside down. So I've got 2 here and 2 here. And I'm ready to put right sides together and match the center seam. So I just flip this over. If you notice the way I pressed, there is like a hill here, so it's sort of flat, and then it goes up a little. And if I come this way, it's flat, and then the seam, it's a little taller here, like a hill. So I call this matching hills and valleys. So this valley and hill and this valley and hill are going to match together. What's going to happen is when I put this together like this, those hills are going to push up against each other, and it's going to make it easy to keep that section together. I usually don't like to pin. I find if I'm only putting 2 together like this, that I can get away without pinning, but I'll put a pin there for now just to show you. I also want to make sure that these edges here match, the edges and this corner match, and likewise on this side. And if I feel more, or if you feel more comfortable putting a pin here and here, that's fine, but I try to stay away from pins whenever necessary. So I've started off with my little feeder piece, and I will line up this, and I just start sewing 1/4 of an inch down. I don't want to sew over my pin, so I'll take that out, and I'm going to peek in here just to make sure that everything's lined up. And let's see, it looks like maybe it's off just a little, so maybe I can adjust that while I'm here. And I said I don't like to use pins, but I do like to use the tip of my scissors to sort of hold everything together. So now I'm going to sew through here, and normally when I'm making a 4 patch, I'm making a whole bunch of them. So I have this other set right here. Let's go through it again. I'm going to flip one, and I'm ready to match. So I put right sides together. I sort of nestle those two hills and valleys together at that intersection. Now you'll see this is kind of out of whack here, and that's not good. So I want to make sure that both of those pieces are lined up. I'm just taking my finger and sort of moving it. That looks much better. When it's all lined up, I take it and I'm going to chain piece these together. To chain piece, I didn't cut my threads. I just put this one in right behind the last one. It allows you to sew much faster when you don't have to pick up your scissors every time and clip those threads. So let's just pretend that I've sewn all of them together, and I'm coming to the end. And well, I like to sew off on one of these scraps of fabric. Let me go through that and clip that, and let's open it up and see what it looks like. So here I have my 4-patch. The center matches, and I'm ready to take this to the ironing board. Some people like to press this seam open, like so. I usually just press it to one side.